Hello, and welcome to another of our short CPD webinars. My name's Nikki Clough. I'm one of the Insight team, and although my professional background is audit and accounting indeed, I now spend most of my time working with clients on leadership and development and the kind of people side of things. So I'm delighted to be presenting this short session for you today. And just to give a bit of context, we've developed a few programs now with clients focusing on combining some of the technical and people skills, and a lot of it around being an effective audit professional indeed. And in the next few weeks, we're going to be running one of these on our CPD, online CPD program, becoming an effective audit RI. And in fact, in particular this time, we're going to be focusing on the process of becoming a new RI. And so we thought we'd take the opportunity to give a little bit of a heads up about the sort of thing that we're going to be covering on that session. And I'm going to take the opportunity in particular to focus on a couple of the soft skills aspects for you. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Here we go. So yeah, becoming a new good audit RI is what we're thinking of. So the session coming up on the 30th of November will run through a number of things, including the application process, managing the transition, some of the technical stuff around how to approach some of those key decisions, also focusing on people who are helping RIs. And aspiring RI, so thinking about mentoring and some common dilemmas that RIs face is the order of the day. And what I'm going to do here is focus on, I suppose it's just those first couple of bullet points, and think about some of the interpersonal soft skills. And in particular, I'm going to make reference to International Education Standard 8, IES 8, which some of you may be aware of. Let's do that first, in fact. Well, what is IES 8 if you didn't know, and what on earth has it got to do with becoming an RI? Well, hopefully you do know. So this is International Education Standard 8, first published in 2014, and in fact there were some revisions made in 2019, effective 2021. And what it does is prescribe the professional competence that accountants are required to develop and maintain when they're performing the role of an engagement partner responsible for the audit of financial statements. So these competencies lay out a number of there's technical competencies, interpersonal, professional skills competencies, and also ethical competencies. And as we'll see, new RIs have to specify and evidence on their application form that they have experience and have achieved competence in each of these areas. It's not just for the new RIs, though, I should say, it is also for existing RIs. And in fact, there's a big emphasis on planning and maintaining CPD in the various areas of competence laid out by IES 8. So it's certainly pretty important stuff. Let's think about the new aspiring RI though. Let's think about the RI application. So, well, it's a big application. This is not it. So obviously it starts off with all the various details one would have to fill in, and your qualifications and so on and so forth. But the real work comes in the appendix, where you have to lay out your audit experience. And there's a lot to do. In fact, there's at least 10 audit engagements carried out within the last 24 months that you have to evidence. And for each of those, we have to tie into the competency areas in IES 8, explain the key issues and challenges on the audit and how those were addressed. And you know, very much tailor each example to the competencies. So some guidance. You don't, I suppose that's maybe the bad news, maybe this is the good news. You don't have to tick off all of the competencies in every example you give. No, it's just making sure that all of the competency areas are covered across the examples provided, but I would expect, you want at least a couple for each competency. What they want you to do is, demonstrate how you have applied a particular skill, maybe how you've challenged the client is the example they've given us here. And another example might be an ethical issue. So, there's a little bit of wiggle room, I suppose, here. The examples should be specific, though. They're not really happy if you just generically talk about, oh, yes, this is as they've said here, how I applied an ethical principle. They really want you to be specific to a client and give details of how you address the competencies. So these are the competencies we're looking at if you're not familiar. So as I said, there's technical competence, professional skills, professional values and ethics. And as you can imagine, most of the interpersonal soft skills competencies are around the area of professional skills. So let's have a look at those. So this is the detail given. So interpersonal and communication, all about communicating effectively and appropriately across the team, the management of the client, and those charged with governance of the entity. There's a bit of an interesting one there, I think, around culture and language. So being aware of diversity, and being able to show that you've resolved issues through consultation. The personal skills there reference acting as a role model, acting as a mentor, or in a coaching capacity to the engagement team. I think it's also very interesting there that, they're referencing lifelong learning and reflective activity, and the importance of CPD certainly comes in there. Organizational skills, thinking about evaluating objectivity and competence, and again, providing leadership, being that role model. It's not just the professional skills, though. If I pick up here on technical competence, again, there's a reference in the audit category to leading the audit, leading the risk assessment. So, and there are other examples, in fact, in the ethical competencies also. So what I want to kind of focus on just in this short session then is, well, okay, when you're filling out your application, when you're gathering your evidence, what sort of things do you need to provide? And I've kind of thought of three kind of groups of areas here. So leadership, mentoring and coaching, and communication coming out of those competencies. What evidence do you need to provide? What are the challenges that you're perhaps going to face in providing that evidence? So let's start by thinking of the leadership competency and being a role model. What are you going to think about there? I think probably the first thing for us to think about is, well, what do we mean by leadership? What is leadership? How can you define that? And there are a lot of definitions out there. Leadership is one of the most popular, shall we say, interpersonal skills to be covered. People love to read about leadership. So definition, I think, sums it up for me. It's a process of influencing people to direct their efforts towards the achievement of some particular goal or goals. Yeah, that works pretty well for me. So leading the team. Now, that probably also works quite well if you're in the firm of a size where you have a team. Perhaps you're the partner, aspiring partner, and you might have a manager, and then maybe the audit senior or junior. Maybe there's even a assistant manager, audit exec in the middle there. But not all firms are of that size, and some firms conducting audits can be a fair bit smaller. So how do you demonstrate leadership when you haven't got a big team to lead? And I quite like the second definition of leadership here, thinking about that effective leadership involves the ability to inspire and influence the thinking, attitudes and behaviour of people. And that to me really taps into the sort of skills and attributes of a leader that you can demonstrate, no matter how many people in your team. When we discuss this on courses, we very often ask for people's views. Who do they think is a good leader? What are the skills and attributes of good leadership? And these are the sort of things that we normally think about. So somebody who leads by example, there's your role model there. Somebody who's decisive, somebody who is assertive and certainly shows confidence, but is also fair, perhaps shows empathy towards the team. The door is open, they're willing to discuss issues, certainly acting ethically, and as we'll come on to, somebody who's able to act in that coaching or mentoring point of view. So no matter how many people in your team, are these attributes that you're able to exhibit. When you're pulling together your evidence, can you show how you have been decisive? How you show how you've been confident? Perhaps linking in some of the ethical issues that you've had to deal with, all to me speak to leadership. I think as well, I'd like to draw the distinction between leaders and managers. So you may be in a bigger team, and this as well speaks to the transition that you might be thinking about, stepping up from being a manager to being a leader, and particularly like this comparison, that perhaps we can think about a manager as somebody who makes sure that things are done right, done correctly, done according to the rules, according to your audit methodology, according to the various auditing standards. Ticking boxes, perhaps. The leader is making sure the right things are done. So it's the bigger picture, it's the professional skepticism, it's the wider knowledge. Another definition sometimes is that you might think of a manager as more of a one-to-one relationship. So one-to-one, one to the team, one to the task perhaps, whereas the leader is one-to-many. So standing up, being that role model, exhibiting the leadership behaviours that people can follow. So if you are stepping up from being a manager to becoming a partner, make sure that when you're recording your evidence that you are making that distinction and showing how you've actually shown leadership, rather than just making sure that all the boxes were ticked. Okay, moving on, let me think also about the requirement to be a mentor, to coach the team. What are we thinking about there? Well, one of the key things is to think about the input continuum. What we mean here is how much you, as the manager or the leader, get involved in the specifics, in the direction of the work that people do. When you're the manager, again, coming on from making sure that things are done right, there's quite a high level of input. There's quite a high level of direction. And then that lessens off, if I would argue, if you're a mentor, and even less if you're acting as a coach. Where you're acting as a mentor, here's another definition for you. So what is a mentor? It's a person with experience in a job who supports and advises someone else who has less experience to help them develop in their work. So you're an advisor. You're somebody that perhaps the team are consulting with, asking for your advice, and you're freely giving that advice with the objective of helping them develop, not just telling them what to do in their job, but actually so that they can do it better next time. Somebody they can go to with questions. So again, can you think of times when you've acted as that mentor, as that, and really that role model? Now, coaching, something I'm particularly passionate about, is ideally very hands-off. And various definitions, this is one of my very favourites from a fantastic book on coaching. It's about unlocking a person's potential to maximise their own performance. It's about helping them to learn rather than teaching them. And if you're in a coaching capacity, as far as possible, it's trying to get the other person to find their own answers. So it's about asking questions. It's not about telling, it's not about giving advice. Yeah, it's about asking the right questions to help them think through an issue and come to their own conclusions. And it's incredibly powerful, but can be quite hard when you think you know the answer. And sometimes there's not the time to coach. Sometimes time is against us and answers need to be given. But where there are opportunities, we really urge you to take those opportunities, and where you can, to coach the team to come to the conclusions themselves. And in doing so, the learning for them will be much more powerful. Again, look out for those opportunities where you have them. Certainly there's something we've been chatting about with a number of firms recently, just recognizing that there's quite a staff issue actually with many firms at the moment, and actually if we don't build these capabilities from quite a junior stage, then actually will the staff coming up have those abilities when they come to assistant manager, manager, partner level? Pretty important, I'd say. And then just a word on communication. Communication. Really, really important. And I suppose what I would say here, especially when we go back to the competencies which refer to communication consulting as well, it's got to be a two-way street. It's easy just to write down, this is what I said, this is what I communicated. But what's key is what the other person hear. And something I would highlight here is the expectation gap between what you say and do and what the other person hears, feels, takes away. So reality and perception gap. You're obvious and somebody else is obvious, not always the same thing. And certainly I think that's what we're really getting at when we're talking about communication consulting. So it's really important when you're recording your evidence, not just to record what you communicated, but perhaps a little more the whole discussion, so that you can actually reflect in your evidence what the client, what the team discussion was. Maybe notes of the team discussion might be very useful here, so that you've got evidence of that two-way conversation. And something you're probably also going to want to demonstrate is how you've dealt with some of the trickier situations, and how you have been assertive. And again, that's kind of coming back to the leadership competency. And again, something I'm really passionate around is thinking about assertiveness, thinking about balance. So assertiveness is balancing your point of view as being equally important as the other person's point of view. Doesn't mean you agreeing with them or necessarily disagreeing with them, but it's going to carry equal weight, and letting the other person know that. If you're passive, it's where you kind of just roll over and let the other person win, as it were. Aggressive behavior, aggressive communication is to try to be too heavy-handed. Whereas assertive behavior is equal balance, putting your perspective across, whilst always also listening and understanding the other person's perspective. And again, think about when you've done that in communication, think about when you've dealt with that situation, and make sure that you've noted that down. So a few kind of final tips, I suppose. You know, we've said already, when you're filling out the evidence, be specific, use real examples, make sure you include sufficient detail. So in communication, not just what you communicated, but the outcome of the discussion. And make sure I suppose you blow your own trumpet a bit. Yeah, this needs to be about you. This needs to be about what you did. Not sometimes, I suppose, we're very used to talking slightly in the third person, but actually this does need to be about what you did and your skills. And the best thing you can do, and the advice I think we've had from lots of people that we've spoken to completing the application, is that it is quite a big application. So if you can record evidence as you're working, if you know that, yeah, you're aspiring RI, this is something that I'm working towards in the next few years, then keeping a note, dare I say, keep a journal perhaps of what you did and the outcomes of discussions and so on, keeping an eye out for examples where you know, yeah, this is where I've shown leadership, this is where I've had the opportunity to mentor, to coach the team. And keeping a note of those is going to make the process much, much easier for you than trying to go back 2 years and kind of like, oh yeah, what did I do? What did I do on that audit? What was the discussion with the team? Because perhaps by the time you've got to the stage of what you've retained on the audit file, some perhaps of those, I don't know, coaching conversations won't necessarily be there. So keeping your own note could be really helpful to you. Okay, that's the end of this short CPD session. I hope that was of some use, and wish everybody going through this process the best of luck with it. And as I say, do please, if you think you find it useful, join us on the 30th of November. And certainly my colleague Peter Herbert will be focusing on a number of these aspects, but also quite a lot of the technical aspects, which I hope you would also find useful. Thanks very much for listening.